A very good morning, Monday morning to everyone, beloved of my Father. And I'm hoping that you have a wonderful week this week as we start our duties today. I just want us to have a few moments of devotion, and I'm going to talk to you this morning under the line "Safe in His Arms." Safe in His Arms, and I borrow this title from a line in Phil Wickham's song. The song, there's a line in the song which says, "When everything seems to be falling apart, you will be safe in His arms." And our scripture reading is based on the book of Ruth. And the book of Ruth, I think you can read the book of Ruth, the passage 1 to 13. And in this passage, Naomi is speaking to her daughters in law who lost their husband and now have become widows. And this inspiring story is recorded as 4 chapters in the book of Ruth. You know the book of Ruth has 4 chapters. And then please read it at your own time for inspiration because it's a beautiful story. It tells of a bereaved mother-in-law who enables a generation of Moabites to become Jewish by choice by allowing and treating her daughter-in-laws kindly. Have you ever even thought of Jesus coming from a line of Jewish by choice, a union of a Moabite and an Israelite, emerging from an equally yoked union? We know we are usually talking about this kind of yoking, but this wasn't an unequally yoked union. And let us also remember that he also descended from a lineage of adultery, our own Jesus. So let us leave our destinies into the hands of God. That is the key message that I want us to take by giving this background of who Jesus is. Someone who came from a Moabite, a combination of a Moabite and an Israelite, and someone who came from a lineage of adultery through David and Bathsheba, and through his great-grandfather Boaz, and Ruth, a Moabite. And this Christ of ours, today I want us to talk about this, that God is actually in control. Do not fear when things happening into you and think that you are alone in these things. And in talking about this story, Naomi at the time had every reason to release her daughters-in-law as she was at her prime age, which she did say, in fact, in her exposition. However, when a Moabite woman insisted on following her, she embraced her, with full arms. She was ready to face the scourge of xenophobia, tribalism in Israel, stigma, mockery, and headed back to her motherland with a foreign childless young widow, a burden in other words, and this move could have actually disadvantaged her even further, because if you are already struggling and fragile at that advanced age, the last thing you can do is to tag along another mouth to feed when you yourself need help. So the selfless character of this mother-in-law is not found anywhere. She chose to struggle with Ruth until God blessed them. How many of us pick and choose nationalities and tribes for our own sons? We despise many of our daughters or sons-in-laws for being uneducated, for being unemployed, uncultured, for being heathens, for being Zulu, for being Tswana, for being Pedi, for being Venda, and so on, for being Xhosa. And our knowledge of their identities and credentials makes us to treat them differently when they enter our families as mothers-in-laws. This even gets worse when death sets in. You just have to watch Mama Zala to see what people go through after the death of their husband. If we don't suspect that they were behind our children's wealth or behind our children's death, our son's death. We actually find ways to dispossess them and their children. It's even worse if the widow is unemployed. We literally want to leave them on the street. And how many mothers-in-law are still in good relationship with their son's spouse? Many of us might be not in speaking terms with daughters-in-law because of minor things that could have been sorted through talk only. So this Naomi becomes interesting for me because she was an exceptional human being, divinely appointed to be the facilitator of Jesus' bloodline, even though she lost her sons. But she holds a special place in the story of redemption, this woman. The child Boaz was nurtured by her. The child Obed was nurtured by her. My apologies. Without her generosity, we wouldn't be here today. We wouldn't be having Christ. The story of redemption would have been aborted at an early age. She took a risk in a very dark tunnel of loss, of hurt, of disappointment, uncertainty, humiliation, and hopelessness. She trusted God's providence and she had faith in her God. She forgot about all societal pressures and cultural expectations that often hold us at ransom. And Ruth experienced a mother's love from Naomi. That's why she clung onto her. Obviously, this was so even before the death of her husband, because if Naomi had been hostile, she wouldn't have chosen to follow her. When, as a mother-in-law or you as a daughter-in-law, you know that the relationship is fake, and that's why at death it can cease, or at the divorce it can cease, because that relationship from the very beginning, it was a fake relationship that was not built on Christ. And moved by compassion of this kind mother-in-law, Ruth sympathized with her loss and offered herself, her entire being, as a sacrifice to this bereaved woman. So love is sacrifice. Bazalwane, love, my sisters, is sacrifice. Naomi is the epitome of a perfect mother-in-law that we can look out to become, to the daughters-in-law that God might give us in the future. Some of us are privileged to have encountered a Naomi's in our lives, and some of us might not be lucky to have a Naomi in their life. And sometimes you will never know the destiny of the children that you pass by every day on the streets. You will never know. They might look shabby and wretched today, but their destiny is in the hands of God. Those children that we shout at church and that we tell of when they come near us, that we are not even bothered whether they had a meal or what. We are not even bothered how they cope on a daily basis. We even forget to mention their names when Dorcas is distributing stuff at church. So we have decided to invisibilize them in our own world, and their struggles is none of our concern. What do I learn from this mother-in-law called Naomi? A spirit of selflessness. If you read Ruth chapter 1 verse 8 to 9, you find that spirit of selflessness in Naomi. She was selfless. She said to her own daughters, "Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grow up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters. It is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord has turned against me." So literally, she blessed the two daughters-in-law. to take their own journey. She wished them well because she was a selfless mother, a mother-in-law, a woman who have lost everything, but is still kind and generous to these young women in her household. She had every reason to insult them for having lived with her sons for 10 years without giving her any grandchildren. But we complain after 2 years of marriage, as if we will look after the children that we complain about. Because sometimes, even if the daughter-in-law has given us children, we usually, once our sons are no longer there, we don't care about those children. So Naomi was a selfless woman. The other thing I read in this story that I take home as a lesson is restoration, that God restores. Many of us, like Naomi and Elimelech, we have wandered away, far away from home. And when everything falls apart in our lives, we find ourselves scared to go back to our roots, to our people, to our God. Many of us who find ourselves as fugitives in very different corrupt activities. And our problems can be fixed by going back to God, because it is in His arms where we are going to be saved. We find ourselves, after our life situations have changed, taking loans, being in debt, thinking that we will solve the problems with money, but instead making our lives difficult. Gandhi, the simple thing is that don't be ashamed of where your difficulties have put you. If you have to downgrade your lifestyle, let it be. You don't even have to make sure that you do anything beyond what God has ordained you to, just because you want to shine for the world. Your restoration is right in the house of God. Go back to Christ.